For the past 16 years, the Metro Social Services Department has conducted a community needs evaluation and issued a report with the results. This year, the title of that report is The High Cost of Low Wages in Nashville. And what they found, among other things, is that more than 200,000 workers in Davidson County earn less than a living wage. This year, the title of the report is The High Cost of Low Wages in Nashville. And what they found, among other things, is that more than 200,000 workers in Davidson County earn less than a living wage. This leads people to relying on public assistance, and that, in turn, traps them in a cycle of poverty while making inequality worse. This week at West End Community Church, Metro Social Services hosted a panel discussion to talk about the report. I had the honor of moderating. It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos.
I want to bring up some truly amazing people who are going to come before you today. We have Stephanie Coleman, who's president and CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, Metro Councilwoman Courtney Johnston, and State Representative Harold Love Jr. If you could, please join me up on stage. They are going to spend this morning some time unpacking this report and getting into the meat of it. We've heard all the details. Now we're going to talk about it. You know, the stuff y'all going to do when you leave here, talk about it. And to facilitate this panel discussion is a woman who I have known, who I've watched, who I've admired, who I've tried to emulate in my journalism career my entire life, a woman who doesn't always speak much, but lives more so by her example. And I will never forget, I used to write teases for her, and I would always look back and like, did she change it? Did she change it? And sometimes she did. And that is where, between you and one other journalist there at Channel 4, that is where I learned to write my teases, from a pro, a true icon, a legend, a veteran here, Demetria Kalodimos.
Thank you, Harriet, for those kind words. And no, I didn't change her teases or her copy very much, because she went on to big and great things and continues to do well. It is so nice to be with you this morning for such an important discussion. You know, this community is not perfect, but if any group of people can come together to address problems honestly and effectively, it's Nashvillians. At least that's the way I feel. Panelists, what jumped off the page to you? What shocked you in this data?
Two things really jumped out to me. One was that 1 in 5 Nashville children are hungry, don't have enough to eat. That's a lot of children in our community. And the other is that more than 1 in 5 Americans are experiencing the benefits cliff. So they are in a position where if they get some more hours or a raise, a promotion, they may be worse off financially.
I don't know that anything surprised me in this report, I hate to say. In the course of my 6 years on council, I've done a lot of work across a lot of different things, and I think the most real life that hits you in the face is when you're dealing with our homeless community. And so you think you know about the homeless community until you actually deal with them and work with them. And so literally, I mean, I would love to have some brilliant, this really surprised me, but none of it surprised me.
Well, I think the issue of the gaps between what people are actually earning and what is required to live comfortably is always startling. And to Councilor's point, those of us in policy areas, we generally know these things because we're always getting reports, we're always getting questions about income, but to see the numbers in this report, I think really brings it home, because the data is the data. And you can look across the city and look at the football and hockey and soccer teams, and it gives an illusion that it's a different city. But then when you look at the data, you really get to see what is underneath that beautiful skyline.
And we're talking about costs that continue to increase year to year. I checked last year's survey. The income was $49,000 and change for an adult with no children. Now we're up to almost $53,000 just in 1 year. How many folks do you know personally who don't come close to that? And talk a little bit about those families.
So in my district, I have a large elderly population. And so I don't know necessarily what their specific dollar amount is. I know that for the most part, they are living in a home that is paid for. So it is utilities that vary. It is food cost that has increased. It is taxes that hurts them, and so that's one of my bigger concerns. I lean towards the elderly and the children, and so that's a huge concern. I've gotten a lot of calls, especially after the proposed budget, from several. I have a 101-year-old that has lived in her home since it was built in 1953.
And she's still there.
She is still there, and her adult children came to my meeting, and she is going to have to move if this property tax increase happens because she cannot sustain it. And so it's very real, the cost of living. And it is true, and the report pointed out that every county is different, right? The cost of living in DeKalb County is very different than the cost of living in Davidson County. And the federal threshold there is obviously antiquated. There's a lot antiquated when it comes to formulas that the federal government has put together. And in the state too, actually. We've got probably some work to do. But that's more my concern, specifically with my district, is my elderly population.
Stephanie?
A couple of examples of individuals I know. I think because I work at the Chamber of Commerce and because we interact with a lot of businesses on a day-to-day basis, I get questions from family members, questions from neighbors who are trying to make ends meet. And many of them are actually below that income threshold, and they're working multiple jobs, and they're just trying to find that one better job, the job that will pay just a little bit more. And so I will have conversations with them about what I'm aware of. You know, what are the job opportunities that might help them? What training or credential might be helpful to make them more competitive? But it's, you know, sometimes that's a grueling conversation and process because it's a lot of work just to make a little bit more money when you're working, living paycheck to paycheck and working multiple jobs and supporting a family.
I have a church member who works 2 jobs, and I see him more certain times of the year because his second job, he works at a restaurant, and of course the tips are better when it's football season. Mm-hmm. But he can't be there when it's not. And I asked him, I said, why aren't you at service? He said, Reverend, I got to work the second job because the tips are better so I can pay my rent. So I can't be here on those Sundays. I can come maybe for Bible study, but I can't be here on Sunday. And he is not an older gentleman. He's under 40. And so I think sometimes when we do point out the issues for those who are elderly, but there is another class of persons who have college degrees, who have not found a job in the particular profession that they went to school for, and are having to work multiple jobs in order to be able to live in the city of Nashville.
We've proven with this report once again that when people can't pay their bills and they're facing hardship, that they turn to government assistance programs. What toll is that taking on the city and your respective areas, and what are we doing about this?
Well, I think one of the challenges we have in government is the way that we view programs that provide assistance to people who are having a difficult situation. For example, a few years back, we discovered that there was over $700 million worth of TANF benefits that the state of Tennessee had not allocated toward its constituents. When the report initially came out, the initial response was, it's an entitlement program, we're not going to increase the benefits, and we're not going to keep people in this cycle of being dependent on government services. But then we asked for the demographics. We said, well, who's receiving these? We found that there were grandmothers who were having to then take care of their children because their son or daughter was incarcerated because of drug addiction. And we also discovered that the demographic was not the traditional government entitlement demographic of African Americans on government programs. It's Caucasian females in East Tennessee. Then the conversation changed to, well, we should probably release those dollars. I said, well, hold on, now how did this change just because of the composition of the demographics? So we need to be careful about how we demonize people who are on these programs and how we sometimes stigmatize them for that moment when they are going through a little bit of difficulty. We noticed this in COVID when we had to shut down businesses. Everybody had to go through the line for unemployment, and they saw the difference in what it takes to get these benefits and how it can be difficult, but how it helps in those difficult moments. And so I think there's a conversation to be held about that, how we view these programs and how we view the importance of them in light of people not having everything they need financially to survive.
I think one of the things that would be really helpful is if our state, not you, our state legislature, and it may be surprising for some people to hear me say this, to really start looking at Medicaid expansion. That is something that would make a marked difference in a lot of people's lives. But the truth is that everything costs money. And so you have to balance the need with, because where does the money come from? The money comes from the taxpayers. Whether it's federal government, state government, local government, it all comes out of your pocket in some way, form, or fashion, right? Is it property taxes? Is it sales taxes? Is it activity fees? All those sorts of things. And so you have to balance that because increasing in those fees or taxes increases the cost of living. So you have to balance what you're charging in order to expand these needed programs without cost burdening too much the taxpayer. And it is a very, very fine line, and we are in this conversation in a very serious way right now in Davidson County on the local level. And so I think one of the things that we need to do better as a county is to stop operating in silo. We have departments that consistently operate in silo and community organizations that consistently operate in silo when we could be coordinating effort and stop duplicating effort and being much more lean and mean about it. When we realized that, so operating for example, I'm going back to homelessness, operating a permanent supportive housing is much, much, much less expensive than it is to operate a daily shelter, by far. So when we start learning those things, it's where can we expand programming where we get the best bang for our buck? And to your point, taking away the stigma of things, and there is stigma around that. It's like, well, most people don't understand what permanent supportive housing is. So let's educate people. But I think that we could do a lot better job of being efficient in what we're expanding, why we're expanding it, and the coordination among government, private, and nonprofit organizations that have the same goal. Let's get there together. And so more of a strategic type plan.
So I know that I think it was last year, you all heard about the Our Chance initiative run by the Martha O'Brien Center, and I know that Marcia's here and Tim Ridley's here and others. But I just want to call that out. So Representative Love mentioned the TANF funds, and this was one of the pilot projects from DHS, and it's a really important pilot and a really important issue for the broader community, but specifically the business community to understand exists, because they may have employees who are on public benefits, who are at a low wage, as we've discussed today, and an employer might attempt to give a raise or promotion or more hours, and their employee may decline, but they don't say why. So there's a real need for, to the extent possible, for employers to more deeply understand the people who work for them and what their personal situations are, if possible. And if not possible, because these are very private and personal conversations, just to be made aware of what resources exist, particularly right now in this moment in time while we have this pilot. And I was talking to Marcia in the break about some upcoming lunch and learn opportunities. Timberly does a fantastic job talking to employers about why they should care and why they should come and learn more. And when we first started talking to the Martha O'Brien Center about this, and I've got some team members over here who've been involved, the first thing we were thinking about is, well, what industries does this impact the most? And there's, you think about the obvious, well, hospitality, retail, restaurants, but actually it's across, as we saw in the report, multiple industries have employees who are relying on public benefits of all kinds, childcare, food, all kinds, housing, and if they take just a little bit more in pay, they hit that cliff. And we've got to make sure that that's more widely understood and known, because while we're trying to promote policy change there, and that's at the federal level, so that's a heavy lift to create more of a transitional benefit instead of a cliff, there are things that employers can do to help mitigate that.
Stephanie, I'm going to stay with you. How difficult is it becoming to sell an unaffordable city?
We are hearing more from employers who are, I would say, both recruiting talent from elsewhere, as well as employers who are relying on talent here who are having to move to more affordable areas. So, we hear a lot about transportation. We were fortunate in Nashville to pass the transit referendum to begin to get that dedicated funding and address our infrastructure challenges, but it's going to take a while. That's not an immediate flip the switch solution. Everything is connected. So you think about housing affordability, you think about transportation, you think about issues like childcare, workforce as a whole. All of these issues are interrelated. And we know that in order to impact the issue that we've talked about today, we have to look at it both from an increasing in income standpoint and affordability standpoint. And it's complex, but it is beginning to become more of a competitive disadvantage for Nashville compared to 10 years ago. If we just look at the cost of living index, which is a very broad measure, but if we just look at that, we were somewhere in the about 89% of the national average a decade or so ago, and now we're right at about 98.7. So right at the national average, but that's because of housing and transportation. When you break it down into pieces, you can see that our housing costs have far exceeded, in terms of the growth, the income growth levels.
Representative Love, are you seeing any extra concern in the legislature for Nashville, or is everyone still considering us the lucky ones?
I think what we see in the legislature is a realization that the sirens and flashing lights that we put up 7 years ago about affordable housing and were ignored by those who represent a district outside of Nashville are now realizing that it's hitting their districts now. We try to tell our colleagues, let the city of Nashville keep incentivizing the building of affordable housing. Let the city of Nashville even have very strong conversations with developers about being intentional about affordable housing. And we actually had legislation to do that that was knocked down. We even talked about what's it look like to have local hire, as a referendum was passed by the citizens of Nashville to say we want to make sure that if there's a government project that 40% of the work goes to local hire. Now what is happening is I'm getting phone calls from colleagues outside of Davidson County who are saying our affordable housing stock is gone. Yes, because people who lived in Nashville have moved to your area because Nashville became too expensive, and now your affordable housing is going in your area, and now I'm open to the conversation. If you want to talk about some affordable housing legislation statewide, but it's the effect. Same thing with Medicaid expansion, right? With hospitals closing down. Same thing we warned and said, listen, it's going to affect everybody if you don't act now. And so it's taken a while, but I think there are some open conversations. My concern, though, is that we may have waited too long to act, and it may take longer to repair much of the damage that's been done.
Courtney, do you think most people who need benefits help know how to access it by now? Or again, is there the stigma that keeps people away from assistance?
I think there's a stigma, and I also think, I mean, I'm in this world, and if I was in a situation, I think I would have to call Renee. Like, what do I do? I don't know that it's readily available, and there's 100% a stigma about it. Not just the stigma from the outside, but also from the inside. It's embarrassing. And so, yeah, I think we could probably do a better job of making that information more accessible. I think we've gotten better about that. But having a centralized, again, strategic planning and coordination among government agencies, community groups, nonprofits, all that, you know, when you have a common goal, regardless of where you are on the spectrum, I think we should all be working together because we're all here together with the same goal. We have room for improvement there.
Let's open it up to the audience, and while you're getting to the mics, I learned a term in this report, clopening. That's when you close one job and you open the next. I can't even imagine working that many hours in that hectic a lifestyle, but it's happening everywhere.
I think we have to acknowledge that it's a multiple-pronged issue. We talk about education, the impact that poverty has on those who are getting an education. We talk about the stress, to your point about opening one job, closing another, the stress of that, what effect it has on your health. Not having health insurance, does that prevent you from going to see a doctor when you first have the ache or the pain? And then when you don't go see the doctor, but then it exacerbates and you finally have to go to the emergency room, that's putting stress then on our systems, but also rising the cost of healthcare. It's all connected, and we gotta have a conversation about this, about the impact that it's having on us. I've been living here 52 years in the city of Nashville. There was a time when the bagger of your groceries at Winn-Dixie, for those who remember that, was the teenager from Whites Creek or Maplewood or Stratford. Mm-hmm. It's now the senior citizen. There's something to be said about the fact that when I delivered pizzas from Pizza Hut, Clarksville Highway, I was in high school. But now you have those persons having to work in that field because they don't have the savings, they don't have the income. And we need to talk about this, and so I'm glad we have the report to start these conversations about the reality of this situation we have in our city.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos, and you're listening to a bonus episode featuring a panel discussion hosted by Metro Social Services.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTESLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
I see some questions coming. How does the federal poverty level number affect us locally, which seems just almost incomprehensible, that $15,000 rate? Would getting that number more in line with reality make any difference?
It might at the state level, because
It's tied to a lot of the things that you talk about.
right, because we'll talk about, like with TISA funding, right? When we talk about a person living in poverty or severe poverty, when we talk about the funding for our city with education, how much money we're supposed to get from the state, I think it's an issue around that. I think that the reality is, even with property taxes, right? The fact that the income was capped at $45,000 up until a year ago, when I was blessed to have members of council having talk about raising the amount to 60,000. We wanted to raise it to 80, but it was pushback because people heard, well, the federal poverty level is here. Why do we need to raise that high? And so I think having that raised would help us at the state level have more conversation that makes sense and are couched in reality other than old arcane numbers.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on, and I was very appreciative that we went from $45,000 to $60,000. Like, as I said, I have quite a few elderly in my district that don't qualify now, even at the $60,000 mark, because costs have risen so much that they're having to take out of retirement. Guess what? That adds to your income. All of a sudden, you're out. You hit the cliff. You hit the cliff. And so those numbers need to be constantly updated in order to stay in line with our cost of living. And every county is different, and that's what makes it hard, is having statewide policy in 95 counties and 95 different costs of living and living wages and all that. It makes it really, really tough to do that. And so I think we need to start having conversations more locality specific versus large land masses that you're comparing apples and oranges, and it's never gonna quite work out, especially for urban areas like Davidson County, where those cost of living numbers are so high.
I'm reminded of the TISA conversations a few years ago when the state was working on the new funding formula, and how, in Nashville, we were really pushing for a deeper understanding of the higher cost of living here for teachers. And how do we differentiate that in the funding formula? And these are complex data questions, but the important thing is that policymakers and business leaders and community leaders need good data. They need good information so that they can make the best decisions possible.
And we need to be nimble as well. I think government is very, very reactive, and we're also slow to react, really slow to react. We procrastinate on a lot of things, and so we create this growing need, and all of a sudden we have an emergency and everything has to shoot up in order to be able to pay attention to it. So I think the data is obviously incredibly important, but also the ability to respond in a very nimble way to those dynamic numbers, I think, is also really important.
From the report here, you brought up teachers. Let's talk education. 31.9% of white students and 64% of black students in Nashville attend high poverty schools. That racial disparity is just glaring. We know there are situations when access to technology is limited, kids need to learn and to compete. So what's the solution, particularly with the new landscape and vouchers?
So you dig deeper with that number when you talk about in those high poverty schools, or rather in those schools where there's a high concentration of kids in poverty.
Right.
More likely than not, you're gonna have a teacher there who may not have the degree in the subject that they're teaching. These are just the numbers. And so as a result, that child may be getting taught by a teacher who, well-meaning, right? but just doesn't have the particular degree that they need for that particular subject. And now this affects that child's outcome. I will say this, that I want to applaud, though, our metro schools for what they've done. I attended a graduation last night at Nashville State, where there was 22 students finishing their early college program. Some students were finishing with their associate's degree and their high school diploma the same night. A good number of students had 66 college credits, right? And they're now on their way, but we can't leave other kids behind. So to your point, with the voucher claiming to hold harmless, I'm looking down at everybody because the conversation about teachers, but the voucher claiming to hold harmless school districts by keeping the funding there, the question has to be asked, where's the money gonna come from? If we're talking about the fact that in Nashville it costs, I think, $11,000 to $13,000 to educate a child, you get a $7,000 voucher, where's it gonna come from, and will we be losing teachers to these other schools? It's a very much needed conversation, again, about African American students not being in a place where they have teachers who are having degrees in that subject matter.
I do think we have to be realistic about the cost of educating our children. And I also want to give MNPS credit for the incredible growth that they have seen. Highest graduation rate on record, level 5 school district for 3 years in a row. They've seen achievement growth in all of their subject areas. And they've done this as a district that serves, as we mentioned, a lot of students with high needs. That economically disadvantaged number is lower than reality because it doesn't account for families that don't accept public benefits. We talked about this earlier, right? So there are families who opt out and they wouldn't be included in those numbers. So it's actually higher, a higher percentage. But I think it's really important to think about what we as a community can do to support the broader needs of students outside of the classroom. And that's really part of that overarching cost, is that we have students coming in who are hungry. We have students coming in who are unhoused, who have a lot of additional needs that they really need taken care of before they can learn. And we just have to be, we have to acknowledge that and be thoughtful about that.
The stresses on our schools, to your point, of children that are showing up hungry. I can't function if I'm hungry and I'm 46 years old. I can't imagine if I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and I'm hungry. You're not going to learn anything at that point. And we are talking about economically disadvantaged families where we've got to get them to a certain level even to be able to receive instruction. We've done a really good job, I think, post-pandemic. I think when we talk about the highest graduation rate that we've ever had, and yet the study came out that only 34% of those were considered ready graduates. That's alarming, because when we're talking about wages, we have to be ready for either that post-secondary education or we have to be ready for the workforce. And we're not. And so also the needs that are being required of the workforce are dynamically changing, right? Computers, God bless America. I can't keep up. And so we need to start really focusing in on what are the needs of our employers, whether it's the private sector or the government. What are we doing to make ourselves more valuable? We've got companies coming in like Oracle. Oracle has told me specifically, the workforce coming out of Davidson County is not able to meet our need. We are having to pull people in from other states. Well, that's not good, because those people are going to be coming in with good paying jobs, and they're going to be able to pay for the higher cost of housing, right? It's when we say everything is related, everything is connected. I don't know if anybody's played with a PDF before, but when you move one thing and everything else messes up, that's exactly what all of this is. And so you have to be very, very careful and making sure that changing over here doesn't negatively impact over here. But we've got to be more workforce ready, obviously. That's incredibly important. My husband is a general contractor. He needs plumbers, he needs electricians, he needs carpenters. All of these skills are just diminishing the number of people that have these skills. And so you end up having to pay more for the electrician, the plumber, which makes the cost of housing that much higher, right? So vocational training, I think, is something that we really need to start focusing in on and get back to. Back in the day, my husband's 56 years old. He's like, we had shop class and it was cool. You know, we were building houses and wiring houses and plumbing houses, small, obviously. But he said, we learned how to do all of these things. And maybe we didn't want to get a job in that, but hey, it saves us from when the sink is leaking, we can fix some things, right? So I just think we've shifted away from that for whatever reason. I think we need to go back to that, because that really is sort of the meat and potatoes of the economy.
Let me ask you this. Has there been a location or a locality that's been successful in encouraging the private sector to increase these living wages? And what tactics have they used? I mean, what's possible for us to do? The mayor alluded to it at the top. It's, limited.
I mean, I will go back to the benefits cliff question, because we actually had an event with employers from multiple sectors talking about it, and many of them up until that event had no idea why their employees were turning down raises. So again, we've got to make sure they understand that, especially at that particular income threshold. There are other incentives for employers. There's Nashville Living Wage is an organization in town where employers can be certified and be listed, so it's more of a recognition standpoint. But things
there's
like
peer pressure also.
Sure,
if they see someone doing it successfully, they may jump on board.
But ultimately, when we talk to employers at the chamber, they want to have employees who are going to stay, who they're going to be able to retain, who they're going to be able to grow. They know that there have been wage pressures over the past few years that have increased wages. But there's a lot of other elements that we haven't talked about a lot yet, but changes in technology, automation, AI, these are technologies that are rapidly changing a lot of these occupations that hire lower wage employees. And so I think employers are also trying to figure out what's next 5-10 years down the road and how they can prepare individuals today to have different skills than they have today.
If I can add, I'd like to suggest that when we have conversations with businesses about increasing wage, that we need to ask them to also provide opportunities for these employees who are getting this increased pay to be financially savvy. It will do no good if the employee gets a $5 or $10 raise per hour and has no education on the benefits of life insurance, even setting aside money, $25 a month for a mutual fund. Because what will happen is if you don't teach persons how to set aside money and save. I'm speaking personally, right? That my parents had to sit me down and say, when you get your paycheck, first is going your 10% to the church. That's the first thing. Then you set aside 10% for yourself. You can spend the rest, but you got to save, right? And so that came about because my father was an insurance salesman as well as a legislator. He talked about the importance of life insurance. And so we got to have the conversation with employees also to say, enroll these folks in some financial literacy classes and allow us to teach folks how to save money, because that's going to start to build generational wealth that then prevents that next generation from having the same issues that their family has.
The bar graph in this report on savings just was mind-boggling.
And is that something that we should be adding to our high school curriculum? Add it to a home economics I mean, there's so many people that don't know how to balance a checkbook. That's just simple addition and math. I mean, I think we're failing on that as well. One thing that I want to say is I think we have an opportunity to really start thinking outside the box when we start talking about matching employer needs with our workforce and having them be prepared. One of the things that we funded with ARPA funds, and you know this, and you may actually know the disposition of that better than I do, but there was a joint effort between the Nashville State and the Urban League, where they were partnering with major employers within the county that had specific skill sets they were looking for. And they said, match us up with the students, we will teach them what they need to know so that then we can employ them. I don't know what happened to that. I think that program fell short of our hopes and expectations, not because it wasn't a good idea. I just think maybe we had some challenges with execution. But that's the kind of thing that we need when we're talking about everyone coming together with the common goal, have a strategic plan, and coordinate to be able to meet the need of these employers. They're willing to pay if you can fulfill their need. We've got to be able to fulfill the need.
And since we are here in this space, I also want to give a shout out to Uprise and the opportunity that employers have to partner directly with community-based organizations like Uprise, like Goodwill, like we talked about the Advancing Workforce Equity with the Urban League and Nashville State. Having those types of one-on-one partnerships allows employers to tap into training opportunities so that they can upskill, reskill their employees, and then that provides them with that next upward economic mobility opportunity.
We've got about 10 minutes left, but I want to ask this one because this is a great question from someone in the audience. If you had a magical policy wand and could change one policy with no political ramifications, what would you change and how would you provide real solutions? Representative Love?
Guaranteed basic income. I'm a movie fan of things that are close to reality. In the movie called The Matrix, the society of machines needed an energy source. And so they had human bodies that produced enough heat and energy, but believed that they were someplace else other than in these structures. The machines survived off of the energy produced by these bodies that were in an illusion that they were someplace else. Our society, unfortunately, the reality is built on an illusion. We like to have a certain level of workers that are kept at a certain wage. Because somewhere in our thinking, if they make more, it comes from us. And so I can't pass policy that'll allow someone to require a business to pay a living wage because it might take from that CEO's golden parachute. And so we are living in an illusion because we're making folks think that we want them to make more money. But we gotta make the hard decisions and stop draining the energy off of these workers at low wages. I've seen it before. Went to South Africa, got Lamborghini and Porsche dealerships on the street, but the restaurant waiter is making equivalent of $2 or $3 American. But it's a Lamborghini dealership. They'll never be able to get it because the society there creates this illusion that they can somehow get up there. And so with a guaranteed basic income, at least you make sure that a person can get at a certain level of income until they get to the place where they can get that job that also gets them at a certain level of income. So if I could pass that, I'd sponsor it next year.
Courtney, wave your wand.
So I think think the most impactful things would happen at the state level when we talk about, Medicaid expansion and these benefits cliffs and things like that. So that's really hard. From the local level, I think I would have to focus in on some policy around education and curriculum additions to help with our students to make them more workforce ready, and to not allow people to be just graduated out of the system when they are not ready. And so what do we need to do to prevent that and to help these students be more ready? From a policy perspective, I don't know. It's also frustrating because I don't have any control over school policy. I think that's a huge misnomer that the mayor or the council has anything to do with education policy. That is not the case. We are just a funding mechanism. But I think when we're talking about wages and workforce and all that, gosh, that starts at our schools. So we have to make sure that our schools are incredibly successful and that our students are coming out ready to go. So that's where I would focus. But it's from the local level, it's kind of hard.
So for me, it would be that transitional benefit. So instead of individuals, when they increase their income, being worse off financially, that we would set our benefit system up so that they would never be worse off financially, and they would therefore be incentivized to take that promotion, incentivized to take those extra hours or to get a new job that would be better for their families.
Just one thing, there are, and Darren Hall, I don't know if anyone is watching our budget hearings, probably not a lot of you, but one of the things that Darren Hall pointed out yesterday that was we've got a lot of antiquated stuff. And one of the things in our charter requires that if you are working more than, I think it's 19 and a half hours, we have to provide health insurance, pension, all that fun stuff. Our workforce doesn't necessarily care so much about that right now. They would rather have a higher wage and be able to work more hours than to have to worry with they should be worried about their retirement, again, financial literacy. But it's things like that that could be updated to meet the needs of the current workforce that I think we should be looking at too, that would allow these folks to work more hours, earn more money, but they can't do that right now. So that's one change that we could make. It's a charter revision. It would have to go on the ballot, but that's something we could do.
And the last question from the audience relates to our marching orders, I guess. What is the plan to get the partners and people who make decisions on the income gap in the same room to hear the raw numbers and data and to make important life-changing decisions for the struggling locals? What do we do with all this information, and how do we get it in every household?
It's really hard to get people motivated to be proactive about something. We always wait until it's an emergency and we're reacting, and by that time it's too late. And so I think really being intentional about our community outreach on what the problem is and that there can be a solution. I think people get really frustrated because it is complicated. It's all related. It all affects, one thing affects 15 other things. And so you get frustrated and you just go, well, there's no answer and I just need to get another job or whatever it is. There are answers, and it is going to take everybody coming to the table to be strategic and to coordinate, have that common goal, and figure out how each piece of the puzzle can move towards that goal together.
I think if we take a step back and divide the report up into certain sections and say, what one thing can we tackle first? That way we have measurable goals.
Prioritize.
Right. So maybe the measurable goal is to reduce the number of African American students in school where there's concentrated poverty, right? So then you say, okay, well, let's get the Metro Schools director, and then we can get with the business community and say, how can we work the situation out? Move to the next thing. Then maybe the next thing is savings, right? So how can we engage our financial systems in the city and all these wonderful businesses that do financial services and provide a year or two of free financial literacy classes, include some in high schools, right? So now we've knocked that down. But I think if we try to take it all at once, we're gonna be disappointed because it's gonna be too much. You've got to take it one step at a time. So we also can have some small victories, and then that'll encourage us and inspire us to move forward.
I was joking with Dr. Garrett Harper during the break that we need to put him on a road show. So that's what I would suggest. But also, the chamber just took a leadership study mission visit to Charlotte a few weeks ago. And one of the things that came up in every single session was a study that had been done by Raj Chetty on economic mobility, where Charlotte was ranked 50 out of 50 for economic mobility. And we were actually 43rd, and then they increased to 38, we increased to 27. But when they were ranked 50 out of 50, that became their rallying cry as a community, and across all sectors, it broke down their silos that we were talking about earlier. They all came together to tackle this issue. For us, we ranked 43rd, but it wasn't a blip on our radar. So I do think there's this question of what is that goal, what is that stat, what is gonna get us motivated to really come together to tackle maybe that first issue, but do it in a unified manner.
I'd like to thank you all for your contributions and your valuable ideas that you've shared this morning, and the work is just beginning. Banner & Company is a production of the new Nashville Banner. This episode was produced, edited, and mixed by Steve Haruch. Original music by Verlin Thompson. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. And special thanks this week to Harriet Wallace and Robert Price. You're in good company.